Hey y'all, it's Jackie from Jet Setting with Jackie. Today we're going to take a look at something that may seem like it's really far away, but it's closer than we actually think. We're going to take a look at the tariffs that the US recently imposed on almost all countries, but we're going to specifically look at Jamaica and the rest of the Caribbean. If this is something that's of interest to you, stick around because the ripple effect of all of this could impact things from the food on our shelves all the way to the tourists that are on our beaches. Let's go ahead and break it down. First of all, what are tariffs? So I know a lot of people have a misconception of what tariffs are, but for that reason, let's go ahead and break down exactly what a tariff is. So let's think of it as the taxes that a country pays on the goods that it imports from another country. So when the US slaps tariffs on goods that it imports into the country, that means that it's going to make whatever that item is more expensive for the people who are going to purchase it, which is typically us consumers. So an example of that would be when we purchase vehicles and import them into Jamaica. When the vehicle comes into the country, whoever purchased the vehicle has to pay taxes on the vehicle. So the dealership buys it, brings it into the country, they pay the taxes, which would be like the tariff on the vehicle, and then guess who they pass that tax on to? Us, the consumer, who's going to buy the vehicle. That dealership is not going to eat the cost. They're going to pass it on to us. Yes, they may pay it up front, but then ultimately, us as consumers, we pay the cost of that tax. So just to put that into perspective, when tariffs are added to products, it makes that goods more expensive, not just for the business that is importing the item, but it also makes it more expensive for the consumer because ultimately the business is not going to eat that cost. The business is going to pass that cost on to us consumers. Most of us may not have seen the speech that was given on April 2nd about the different amount of tariffs that were imposed on different countries. But for the Caribbean, there was a broad 10% tariff that was assigned to most of the countries. I believe some countries had some that were higher based on whatever the trade deficit was that the US perceived they needed to make up for. Now, you may be saying, well, we're not China and we're not Mexico and we're not all these other countries. But just because we're not a large country, that does not mean that this still does not affect us. Why should you care about any of this? Well, let's go ahead and find out. The Caribbean exports a variety of goods to the US, especially Jamaica. We export aluminum, coffee, rum, and a lot of other items. I spoke a lot about this in my previous video when I talked about the benefits of having the US versus China as a partner. We trade with the US more than we trade with any other country. They're our biggest trading partner. So these tariffs, whether directly or indirectly, could definitely affect our import and exports. If the US begins to impose tariffs on any of the items that Jamaica exports to them, that could hurt us in a couple of major ways. The first way that it could impact us is the fact that the demand for the items that we export to the US could be reduced because now the cost of that good is now more than what it used to be. That could potentially cause US buyers to seek cheaper alternative because now the rate that they typically pay for whether it's coffee or rum or whatever the item is now going to be more expensive. Another big way that this could impact us is with the reduction in income for exporters, which means that we could see a reduction in the income of our farmers, our small businesses, and our workers. Here's something else to think about. Tariffs do not only affect the cost of goods, they can shake up your entire economy. Just take a look back to last week, what happened with the US markets once those tariffs were announced. All over the world, markets start to go crazy. There were decreases in everything. Our 401k start looking real sketchy, and everything started to drop. Just saying that these tariffs were coming and were going to be imposed on certain countries made the market in the US tank. So think about the fact that those tariffs aren't just about the goods that are coming into the country, it's about the overall economy of a country. And for us in Jamaica, where tourism is one of the major ways that we make money, the tourism industry could definitely be affected by the imposing of these tariffs. Think about it this way. If the tariffs are applied to certain goods and services, which means that for American consumers, the price of goods increase, which means that they're now paying more for things that were cheaper. That means they have less disposable income that they can use for other things like traveling. Just imposing tariffs increases the cost of goods for consumers, which now reduces their disposable income, which then reduces the amount of vacations that they take. So that trickle-down effect starts to seep into things that it's not directly related to. So with tourism being the lifeblood of many of our Caribbean islands, a drop in visitors and tourism in itself, that's another blow that we will have to take on just from the changes of these tariffs. And here's another domino effect that we need to keep in mind. If the US prices start to increase because of tariffs, that means that we're going to feel it too. Why? Because the Caribbean, we import tons of items from the US. We import food, electronics, cars, appliances, and a bunch of other things. If all of these goods start to become more expensive in the US, that just means that it's also going to cost more by the time it gets to us. Overall, that means the cost of daily living for all of us in the Caribbean will start to increase as well. So is there any good news in all of this? Well, it's not all doom and gloom. I'll say that. Based on how things have been shaping up over the past week or so, I was really looking to see who was going to do what and how this was going to play out before I made this video. And I know the US has put a pause on certain tariffs with certain countries, and then at the same time, they have imposed even higher tariffs on some countries, specifically China, which means that if the US starts to sever some of their partnerships or agreements with other countries and they're not able to do business with them, I do believe just because of the proximity to the Caribbean that they will try to do more business with us, which can be a good thing because that means that our trading agreements and partnerships could stay in place. One of the agreements that I spoke about in my previous video is the Caribbean Basin Initiative, where there's a duty-free agreement between the US and some Caribbean islands. That agreement allows for a lot of the trade that Jamaica does with the US as well as other Caribbean islands. So if that agreement is exempt from the 10% that was imposed on the majority of the Caribbean islands, then that will keep the level of trade the same, and a lot of the goods that we export and import will not be affected. Did I say affected or infected? Either way, will not be affected. However, I did hear the Prime Minister speak about this specific initiative last week, and there was not clarity as to what the 10% tariff was supposed to apply to.
You see the downside of the disruptive global order that we have now. We are not going to sit by and wait. There are opportunities that must be had. And so I urge my manufacturers, my business people, before you start to look at the negative, also look for the opportunities. In the past, we used to hope that good friendships will come to our rescue. In the past, there are those who believe the world owed us something. That is not my stance, and I have not run this government in that way. We must be prepared for shocks, and we must be resilient. We must be able to absorb the hit and recover. And we must put ourselves in a position to always be welcomed at the table to negotiate. The recent announcement by the United States government of a 10% baseline tariff on imports from all countries set to take effect on April 5th, 2025, introduces a significant shift in global trade policy, one that could impact Jamaica's market access to our largest trading partner. While the government of Jamaica has not yet received formal notification on the precise implementation procedures, including whether these new tariffs will override existing CBI provisions, we are actively engaging with the United States Trade Representative and other relevant authorities to seek urgent clarification. We are also conducting a detailed technical assessment in collaboration with relevant ministries and agencies to fully understand the scope of these tariffs and their implications for Jamaica's trade and industrial policy. These developments do not reflect any erosion in the long-standing and strong bilateral relationship between Jamaica and the United States. Rather, it reflects a broader recalibration of U.S. trade policy that is global in scope. Still, we will use every available diplomatic channel, including working with our CARICOM brothers and sisters and utilizing the Office of Trade Negotiations to seek to preserve the positions our exporters have secured over decades of deepening trade ties.
I know that they're in the process of probably working out the details as to what is it supposed to be impacting versus what it is not supposed to be impacting. So as of right now, I don't believe it's clear if that agreement will be impacted. If that agreement does stay in place and it is not affected by the 10% tariff that was imposed, then that means that we will still be able to conduct trade as normal, which means us in the Caribbean could be in a good position when it comes to increasing the amount of trade over time with the US, especially if they are seeking to avoid countries with higher tariffs on them. So what does this all mean for Jamaica and the rest of the Caribbean? I was watching a speech from the Prime Minister of Barbados, and she mentioned a lot of great points, which is aligned with a lot of what I was speaking about in my video about who we need to partner with as Caribbean countries.
I speak to all our Caribbean brothers and sisters today, not as the Prime Minister of Barbados, but in my capacity as chair of the Caribbean community. Our world is in crisis. I will not sugarcoat it. These are among the most challenging of times for our region since the majority of our members gained their independence. Indeed, it is the most difficult period our world has faced since the end of World War II, 80 years ago. The international order and the international system, my friends, is in grave danger of collapse. And now we are on the precipice of a global trade war. Our Caribbean economies are largely reliant on imports. Just go to the supermarket or visit the mall or the hardware shop or the electronics store and you will see that most of the things there are not produced in this region. Many of those commodities are either purchased directly from the United States of America or pass through the United States of America on their way to the Caribbean region. That, my friends, is a legacy of our colonial dependence. Together with colleague heads of state and heads of government, we have been working to diversify ourselves away from this dependence. We've already started to reap some successes, especially in the field of agriculture, for example, but we still have a long way to go. As we do this work, we have to be mindful that those recent announcements that have been made in the last few days will impact us very directly as a region and as a Caribbean people. We are working and will continue to work to become more self-sufficient. But I want every Caribbean man and every Caribbean woman to hear me. This trade war and the possibility of a $1 million to $1.5 million levy on all Chinese-made ships entering US harbors will mean higher prices for all of us at the corner shop, higher prices at the supermarket, higher prices at the electronics store, higher prices for us at the shop, higher prices for us at the restaurant, higher prices for us at the car dealership and beyond. A lot of Caribbean people will think that these things that you are seeing on television news or reading about are far away and they don't impact on me. A lot of people think I'm just a farmer, or I'm just a school teacher, or I'm just a mechanic. They say, I live in St. Lucie in Barbados, or I live in Portmore in Jamaica, or Kingstown in St. Vincent, or Rima in Trinidad, or Basse-Terre in St. Kitts, or San Ignacio in Belize. These problems are far away from me and they don't impact me. That is what you will hear them say. But the reality, my friends, is that if you buy food, if you buy electronics, if you buy clothes, it will impact you. It will impact each of us. My brothers and sisters, our Caribbean economies are not very large. So we are and have always been at the whims of global prices. If Europe and China and the US and Canada and Mexico are all putting tariffs on each other, that is going to disrupt supply chains. That is going to raise the cost of producing everything from the food you eat to the clothes on your back, to the phone in your pocket, to the car you drive down the road, to the spare parts that you need for critical infrastructure. That means higher prices for all of us to pay. And sadly, yes, this will impact all of you, regardless of what any of our Caribbean governments will do. We could lower our tariffs to zero in CARICOM, and it will not make a lick of difference because our economies are small and vulnerable. This crisis, my friends, will impact not only goods, but it may also have a large spillover effect on tourism. We suggest that the region take steps to sustain the tourism industry, as likely worsening conditions in many of our source markets will have negative impacts on people's ability to travel. We call on our regional private sector and the tourism sector to come together and to work with governments to collaborate for an immediate tourism strategy to ensure that we maintain market share numbers as a region. It is because of our small size, our great vulnerability, our limited manufacturing capacity, our inability to distort trade in any way, that successive United States administrations, including and most recently the Reagan administration in the early 1980s, went to great lengths to assist us in promoting our abilities to sell in the United States under the Caribbean Basin Initiative. We will see how these tariffs will impact on that. We must not fight among each other for political gain. Because, my dear brothers and sisters, as the old adage goes, united we stand and divided we fall. We must redouble our efforts to invest in Caribbean agricultural production and light manufacturing. The 25 by 2025 initiative, ably led by President Ali, seems too modest a target now, given all that we are confronted. We must grow our own and produce our own as much as possible. We can all make the decision to buy healthy foods at the market instead of processed foods at the supermarket. We must build our ties with Africa, Central and Latin America, and renew those ties with some of our older partners around the world, in the United Kingdom and Europe, in Canada. We must not rely solely on one or two markets. We need to be able to sell our Caribbean goods to a wider, more stable global market. My brothers and sisters, in every global political and economic crisis, there is always an opportunity. If we come together, put any divisions aside, support our small businesses and small producers, we will come out of this stronger. My brothers and sisters, there's trouble in our Caribbean waters. But the responsibility each and every day for much of what we do and much of what we grow must be ours. If we take care of each other, if we support each other, if we uplift each other, and if we tap into the strength and innovation of our common Caribbean spirit, we will see this through. Our forefathers faced tribulations far worse than we will ever do. And yes, they came through it.
So what should we do as Caribbean countries? Our governments need to be proactive. They need to begin to diversify who we export to and also who we import from. They need to work on strengthening our local industries and definitely be prepared for the increases in prices that are coming. And our businesses here also need to be proactive. Our businesses need to be watching what is happening in the market and start to make decisions about possibly seeking other trade partners if the ones that we're currently working with are not panning out to make sense financially. And as consumers, what should we be doing? We should definitely be paying attention to what is happening around us globally. We should be watching to see how politics is influencing the markets, the stores, prices, and ultimately our wallets and our day-to-day life. So before I end, let's just reflect on tariffs itself. They may sound like something that just specifically affects countries like China and the US and Mexico and Canada, large countries. But in actuality, the ripple effect affects all of us. Now more than ever is when we should stay informed. We should be supporting our local businesses. We should be seeking other partnerships if needed, and definitely be pushing for stronger regional ties. Us in the CARICOM can be stronger. We can be more supportive of each other when it comes to business and trade, because the ultimate goal at the end of all of this is for us all in this region to be more self-reliant and not relying on the big giants that dominate these spaces. We should be coming together because together we're all so much stronger than us individually trying to fight battles and be a part of a trade war where our voices are not as loud as the bigger countries. I hope that you found this video to be helpful and it gave you some insight and some clarity on how these new tariffs could affect us all. If it did, be sure to hit that like button, hit that share button, and of course, if you have not already, hit that subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, bye.